The race to win wars and explore the stars have created some of the most fantastic products ever designed, and we use them every day, unaware of their amazing origins. On Wicked Inventions. The drum, keeping time musically and also on the battlefield. The Slinky, how a simple metal spring defies physics. The fencing sword, the deadly past of this Olympic sport. We reveal the amazing science and manufacture behind these wicked inventions. From the Neolithic era to the 21st century, one invention has been our constant beating companion. It has been used by the ancient Chinese and Mongolian tribes, the Aztecs of Mexico, and Native Americans in the plains of the United States. We're talking about, of course, drums.
With regards to drums, we've got to go back in time. Really ancient times. Africa, the hollowed out log, intimidating the next tribe, the enemy, or the next village, you're coming. The Native Americans with their drums, it's telling you, we're coming.
Drums are the oldest musical instrument, and its basic design has remained almost the same for thousands of years. Drums benefit from a very simple design. It is classified as a membranophone. Since it consists of at least one animal hide that has been stretched, and when struck by hand or a drumstick, it produces a deep and loud sound, and is commonly viewed as the root of music. But its use on the battlefields of history has given this instrument a bloody past. Many kingdoms, tribes and nations rose and fell at the sound of a beating drum.
Well, the most simple use for the drum is marking time for the regiment and beating the time of their different movements when they're doing their drill. Both in the English and the American Civil War, the drum beat was paramount. It was the most important thing. Without it, you couldn't get all of your men to present at the right time, fire at the right time, otherwise it would be chaos on the battlefield.
Even though we've been using the drum for over 5,000 years, its role on the battlefields of history make this instrument a remarkable, wicked invention. Liberty have been making drums in County Durham, England since 2006.
Liberty Drums was born from my passion of drums. I had to know, as a drummer, how that drum kit that I was playing, why it sounded like it did and why it was different from other drum kits. And over the years, I learned how to make drums for friends and family.
Uniquely at this factory, all of the drums are manufactured by hand throughout the whole production process.
We build the drums up from the raw timber, so we source in the birches, the maples, mahoganies, and we build up our kits ply by ply. Essentially, every element is handmade. All the timber is always handled by hand, right to the finishing process, to a really fine instrument.
The process begins with the selection of the finest timber to make the shell of the snare drum. Strips of plywood are measured out and precisely cut to size. These will be laminated together to form the drum shell.
Each drum shell is formed from a raw sheet of ply. In our case, we use a lot of birch. So the birch ply would be hand cut and placed in a cross-laminated formation, so it gives it strength and durability. It depends the type of design of drum, how thick, how many veneers.
For what will become the outer layer of the drum, 2 strips of the plywood are laid up either side of a decorative beading strip and held in place using masking tape. Each plywood layer is coated with a special glue component and carefully manipulated into place within a solid-walled mould.
Each veneer gets a coat of glue by hand and then placed in the mould. Each ply, we use a specific compound of glue. And then each leaf, veneer, we placed in the mould to make up that specific drum. So it depends the type of design of drum, how thick, how many veneers.
The purpose-built mould applies external pressure to the plywood layers. The shell is left to dry naturally in the mould for 24 hours to ensure a good bond. Once dry, the drum is extracted from the mould and checked for any imperfections in the laminate. The edges of the drum are then precisely trimmed using a circular saw. The drum surface is then carefully sanded by hand to ensure a good, smooth finish. Next, the decorative bead is masked with tape, and one half of the drum is stained with a coloured lacquer. Once the lacquer is dry, the whole drum is coated with a layer of wax for protection and to give a smooth finish. Once the desired finish is complete, the edges of the drum are beveled using a routing tool. This will form a bearing edge for attaching the drum skins later on.
The bearing edges is the inner slope of a snare drum, which is quite a fundamental design of every drum. It depends on the type of tone that you would want. It depends on which angle you would use.
Next, rings of masking tape are applied around the circumference of the drum so that it can be marked up for drilling. A template is used to mark the positions where the drum will be drilled. More masking tape is applied at each position around the drum, and a template is used to mark the correct positions for the drilling holes. Holes are drilled through the drum shell at all of the marked locations, and then all of the external metalwork is screwed on around the edges of the drum. These are used for attaching the drum heads, as well as the snare wires. Next, the bottom drum head is attached to the drum using a metal hoop, which is screwed onto the drum through the metal lugs. The drum head is then tightened and tuned to ensure even tension around the head, using a drum key. The wire snare is attached to the bottom head of the drum. The snare wires stay in contact with the drum head and vibrate when the drum is hit. It is this that gives a snare drum its unique, snappy sound. The final step is to attach the top drum head and tune it, ready for a thorough test in the drum room.
We can generally comfortably make 20 to 30 kits per year. Along with snare drums would be a separate build, so we could do 50, 60 snare drums. A drum kit isn't just a drum kit. A drum kit is a professional instrument which is built for purpose. And there could be quite serious pieces of kit, and they last forever.
So there you have it, the snare drum. From marching band to rock star, it truly is a wicked invention. The Slinky, a metal marvel that still continues to amaze young and old alike. But how is this innocent toy connected to World War II? And what is the amazing science behind its quirky ability to walk downstairs? The simple, pre-compressed helical spring, that's a coil to you and me, was first invented by Richard James way back in the early 1940s, whilst working with the US Navy, who were busy trying to defeat the Japanese in the Pacific Ocean. As part of the war effort, James and his team were busy building spring shock absorbers to keep delicate navigation instruments on board warships safe and free from damage in even the heaviest of storms.
The Slinky was an accidental invention, if you will. It was discovered by Richard James when he knocked over some springs. He realised the way that they walked across the floor could be possibly becoming a product. And this product basically was designed such that you could play with it. He showed it to local kids, the children there loved it, and he realised he was onto a winner.
With excitement at the spectacle still fresh in his mind, James and his wife borrowed $500 and began a year of research and development to get a toy idea ready for the 1945 Christmas rush. But disaster seemed inevitable when big department stores sneered at the simple metal coil. But James demonstrated the toy to shoppers in person, and by the end of the year, the Slinky was the must-have toy all across the USA.
It can be made from steel or plastic nowadays, and the plastic ones is obviously sometimes more children friendly, and the only modification that's ever been made to the Slinky from its original design is on the metal one to make sure the ends of them are not sharp, mainly to avoid people getting cut. But the product itself is very simple and was sold very cheaply.
The Slinky's form may be simple, but don't underestimate the complicated scientific principles at play. Nudge the coiled spring down a flight of stairs and be prepared for a major physics lesson. With a life of its own, the toy begins to move by independently falling over itself from one step to the next in a fluid motion. The Slinky is demonstrating a myriad of forces as it moves down the steps. Friction, inertia, momentum, and potential and kinetic energy are all acting on the coiled spring. At rest, the Slinky is still and will not move. This is called inertia, and is the resistance of any physical object to a change in its state of motion or rest. Inertia is aided by the effects of friction, which is a force that resists the movement of objects as they slide against one another. In the Slinky's case, the air that it passes through, and the carpet that covers the steps. The fact that the Slinky is at the top of the stairs means the effects of gravity are stored as potential energy, as spring tension. If this energy is released, in our case by giving the toy a little nudge, the potential energy is converted to kinetic energy, the form of energy governed by motion, which means the Slinky is now moving. So why does the Slinky keep going? Well, as the Slinky takes its dive down the first step, it stretches, thereby storing energy. That energy reaches a point where it must pull the tail along, flipping it over the next step. Now momentum comes into play. This flipping action continues as the Slinky's momentum cannot be stopped by the forces acting against it, for example the friction. Objects with a larger momentum require more energy to move and to stop, while those with low mass and velocity have less momentum. Thus, the greater the weight of the Slinky and the angle down which it is travelling, the greater the momentum. Which is why a metal Slinky is better at travelling downstairs than a plastic one. This complicated, yet playful action has captivated children ever since it was first introduced, nearly 70 years ago, and its popularity shows no signs of declining. Enough Slinkies have been sold to go round the Earth a staggering 121 times. That's over 300 million individual items. They've gone to space on the shuttle and being used not just by children but by US troops in Vietnam as portable radio antenna in the wild jungles of Southeast Asia.
The Slinky is quite a unique toy because it's actually very cheap, very simple, doesn't require any moving parts apart from the Slinky itself. So as far as toys go, it's unique. It doesn't have any sounds, nothing like that. The main uses for it have actually been in physics experiments. A recent paper was published in 2011 demonstrating all the mathematics behind it, showing that the Slinky has still quite a few secrets to reveal.
It seems there's life in the old spring yet. The Slinky. Truly a wicked invention. The Slinky might have been flying off the shelves since the 1940s, but can it actually fly? Or float might be a more accurate way of describing it. Are we mad? Well, maybe not. The experiment. We will drop a large Slinky from a great height and film it using a special slow-motion camera to capture the results. To start, a large building with a platform with easy access to allow for a very scientific dropping of a classic children's toy. Check. Large Slinky. Check. Special slow-motion camera focus and expose at the absolute perfect settings to capture our spectacular Slinky fall. Check. Our gallant tester ascends the stairs, takes position, and is all set for the experiment to begin. With his arm outstretched at a perfect 90 degrees to his body, he lets the Slinky unravel to its fullest extent, whilst expertly holding on to one end. He signals that he is ready, and a disembodied hand presses record on the camera. The test can begin. Our man lets go of the Slinky, and less than 2 seconds later, it hits the ground. Did you see the Slinky float? No? Neither did we. Let's review the tape. Now seen at 150 frames per second, we can see something amazing happen. As the Slinky is released, the top of the toy falls vertically as you would expect. But look at the bottom. It is not moving. Floating perhaps. Astonished? Well, we are. But how is this steel spring cheating gravity? Again, science comes to our aid. Before it is dropped, the bottom of the slinky is suspended with gravity pulling it down in one direction, and the spring's tension pulling it up in the other, so equal and opposite forces act on the bottom, leaving it motionless. When the top is released, the information that the tension has changed takes a moment to reach the bottom of the spring by spreading as a compression wave down through the slinky. Once the wave hits the bottom of the slinky, it knows to fall to the bottom, so to speak. So there you have it, point proved, the slinky can float. Well, kind of. The slinky, truly a wicked invention. Fencing is a sport of precision, style and grace. Watching two world-class fencers on the Olympic stage is something special to behold. However, it is a world away from the dark history of dueling that led to the establishment of the sport we know today. Starting with prehistoric clubs and spears, armed combat has been around for almost as long as mankind. Throughout history, there are plenty of references to heroes selecting one another for a duel. We've all heard of Roman gladiator fights and duels, but it's perhaps a lesser known fact that the Romans frequenting baths often duelled with sticks, arguably an early sign of what was to evolve into modern fencing. Dueling is the engagement in combat between two individuals, both with matching weapons and often with a set of pre-arranged rules. Duels were fought as a way of regaining or retaining a sense of honour, as opposed to necessarily killing the opponent. Roman soldiers were trained to thrust instead of cut, as a raised arm cutting motion would expose vital organs to the enemy. This thrust is the basis of modern fencing technique. By the 14th century, sword fighting schools were quite common in many European countries. This established a correct way to fight with a sword, and the lack of ability to do so was seen as ungentlemanly.
There was a fencing instructor called George da Silva who actually said that if a man carries a sword but cannot use it, he's as full ridiculous as a man who carries books but cannot read.
By the 19th century, as duels became less common and actively discouraged, fencing became increasingly recognised as a sport. Slowly, the combative aspect of fencing faded until we were left with the pure sport of today, and saw it recognised in the first Olympic Games of 1896.
So fencing is one of only about 7 or 8 sports that has been included in the Olympic Games since its very inception until present day. And that means that it's become a very global sport. It's done from all over the world, in all corners of the world, in places that you never would have thought that fencing would be possible.
Modern Olympic standard fencing is broken into 3 categories, each referring to the weapon used and each with their own different set of rules. Foil fencing uses a light and flexible sword. Arms and legs aren't allowed to be targeted, so all of the action takes place with accurate thrusts to the torso, neck and groin. Epée is similar, but the sword is heavier and the whole body can be targeted. Sabre fencing only allows athletes to target above the waist and uses a light, cutting sabre sword. Today, because of the high-speed nature of the sport and to ensure accuracy, all judging is done electronically.
Fencing is so fast that it was very hard for the referees to see exactly what had happened, and now by adding an electronic scoring element into it, you can be 100% sure who's got that hit and who's therefore won the fight.
One of the leading producers of modern Olympic fencing equipment is London-based Leon Paul.
So we've been producing fencing equipment for 96 years, but we've been creating swords and forging the blades for about 60 years now.
So, how are these wicked inventions made?
An Olympic fencing sword is designed to be incredibly light, so it can be very accurate and very fast for the athletes to move and score hits with. What we've done at Leon Paul is we've managed to reduce the weight by introducing new metals like miraging steel, aircraft aluminium for the alloy in the guards, and even the handle is made from magnesium, making it 40% lighter.
There are many individual steps involved in producing an Olympic standard sword for fencing. The process begins with miraging steel, a metal of superior strength and toughness, yet still has a high level of malleability.
We use miraging steel for the Olympic blades, and that's because it has very little carbon in, and that means less flaws are likely to propagate, and that means that it's going to last a very long period of time.
The steel is first cut to the correct length using a saw. This particular automated saw can cut many blades at a time to precisely the right measurements needed. Once cut, the area of the blade that will form the handle is then heated to form what is known as the tang. These tangs are rounded and allow for comfortable grip or the addition of a moulded or wooden handle. The blade is then taken to the main forge, where it is heated to roughly 800 degrees centigrade using radio frequency coils, much like the heating process in a microwave. Once the metal is red hot, rows and rows of very strong hammers thin the blade out to the correct proportions to produce the perfect foil shape.
There's some quite unique developments in fencing. For example, the blades can be made to be heavier at one end than the other, and this can allow a more attacking fencer to have a lighter, faster moving weapon, or a more defensive fencer to have a stronger parry or a stronger block. There's also now the introduction of being able to custom make your grip so it fits your hand perfectly by the introduction or invention of 3D printers. And finally, you're able to make the tip, the electronic scoring apparatus that's in the very end of the blade, can be made out of titanium, making it much, much lighter and much stronger and more durable.
Now formed, the blade is beginning to resemble a recognizable foil. The metal is then heat treated. This heat treating process is vital in producing a great quality blade. Because the steel can become brittle in the forging process, heat treating re-strengthens the metal and also increases its flexibility, allowing it to withstand pressure and become extremely long-lasting.
The world record for the longest lifespan of a blade is about 37,000 cycles, so that's 37,000 hits, and that record is actually held by a Leon Paul blade.
The surface of the blade is then finished first in a grinding machine, which gives it a smooth finish. From here, the blade continues through the shot peening process. This fires small beads of glass at the steel that creates a composite residual stress layer, as well as increasing its sheen. The blade is taken to be laser engraved with the Leon Paul stamp, showing when and where it was made, as well as the grade of steel. Modern fencing is scored electronically, and therefore all Leon Paul blades are equipped accordingly. A wire that connects the electronic tip of the blade to the sensor is fitted with glue, completing the blade making process. It is now time to create the guard of the sword. This is made from an aluminium sheet, which is bent to shape using a hydraulic press, which forms the perfect rounded shape for protecting the hand of the user. It is then riveted in order to reinforce the base, before being stamped with the Leon Paul logo. The base is then polished by running water over the metal and scrubbing it with china, and finishing it off under the polishing wheel. Now that we have a finished blade and guard to match, it all needs to be assembled into a full sword. The electronic wire is attached to the electronic socket, meaning the sword is now equipped to score electronically. This is fitted along with the cushion pad and handle. The handle can be custom made using a 3D printer, or be fitted with a more traditional wooden handle that has been hand wrapped in leather. The sword is then tested to ensure it passes all of the official FIE rules and regulations. The fencing sword. Truly a wicked invention. So there you have it, a dash through the hidden history, super science and amazing manufacture of products that you use every day, but have never realised their amazing background. The drum, the slinky and the fencing sword, all wicked inventions.